I want to start by clearing something up, because this is where almost everyone gets it wrong. Most people don't fail to build systems because they're lazy. They fail because they're trying to build the wrong kind of systems at the wrong time. What you usually hear online is some version of document everything, create SOPs, map your processes, and technically, none of that is incorrect. But it ignores a very real constraint. You're operating inside of a live business. Customers are calling, employees are asking questions, and of course, the money is always moving. The problems are happening in real time. So when someone tells you to step away for weeks and systemize, what they're really asking you to do is pause reality. And of course, we all know that is not how business really works. My name is Sebastian Wolfgram, and I've started multiple successful companies such as Showcar that I've actually franchised to multiple states. On top of that, I've marketed and consulted for some of the top brands all the way down to local service-based companies. Here's the first hard truth. If your system requires more discipline than your business can currently support, it will fail. That's why most founders start documenting, stop halfway, and never come back to it. Not because they don't care, but because the system itself becomes a burden. Another misconception is that systems are about organization. They're not. Systems are about removing decision-making from places it doesn't belong. So if you're still deciding how something gets done, who does it, or when it happens, that area is not systemized. No matter how many documents exist, it is not systemized. And this is where founders get trapped. They confuse knowledge with structure. They know how things should work, but they just haven't taken that knowledge and systemized it to where it can run without them. So let's get specific. A real system has one clear outcome, not a department, not a role, not a vague responsibility, an outcome. For example, leads are contacted consistently and followed up properly. Clients are onboarded without confusion. Work gets delivered at the same standard regardless who's working. That outcome either happens reliably or it just doesn't. Now here's where founders sabotage themselves. They try to fix the entire outcome at once. That's like saying, I want to fix my health and try to change sleep, diet, training, stress, and work all at the same time. It doesn't work. Instead, you isolate the single activity inside the system that creates the most drag. This part matters, so don't rush it. Inside every system, there is one step that causes delays, one step people avoid, or one step that depends on you too much. That's not an accident. That step is where the system is weak. And weakness is where you build first. Here's a practical way to find it. Ask yourself, what part of this process do people screw up when they're trying? Not because they're careless, but because the structure isn't clear. That's your entry point. Not because it's the whole system, but because fixing it improves everything downstream. Now for me, there was a stretch at Showcar where I genuinely believed I was being a strong operator because I was involved everywhere. I knew every moving part, I can jump into any issue, and I was personally the safety net. And for a while, that actually felt like control. But what I started noticing was how often the same things kept coming back to me. The same questions, the same clarifications, and of course, the same fixes. It wasn't chaos, it was repetition. And repetition is the clearest signal that something wants to be systemized. I noticed that a ton when we were growing fast on social media and gained a large following. We had 300,000 followers, and I can never actually focus on the business because every day I was working from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. filming every single piece of content, editing them, and of course, at 7 p.m. I was coming around and editing everything on CapCut. Voiceovers, obviously text boxes, and being able to make sure it was the perfect social media post. That is not very sustainable for me, especially when I'm trying to grow my business. Now, the one problem I had is no one could figure out how to do it like me. At first, I thought the answer was going to be better people, more training, more explanation, but none of that actually fixed it. I kept having to jump in to film content because the business was only growing so much and I was having other issues in other parts of the company. What finally clicked was this. The business wasn't depending on bad employees, it was depending on my memory. So I didn't sit down and write SOPs for the entire operation. I picked one narrow problem, just one, and I asked myself, if this ran perfectly without me, what would you actually change? Then I broke it down to a level of actions, not theories, actions. I created an actionless item for a very specific employee, and his whole focus was filming content throughout the day. At the end of the day, it would go into a drive fully clipped up, and I would do the voiceover myself until we eventually cloned myself using an AI voiceover to take away everything that needed to be done on my side. Once I did that, I was able to put my focus into new locations and eventually franchise my business across multiple states. That was the moment I stopped thinking about systems as documentation and started thinking about them as pressure relief valves. Okay, I'm gonna fill you guys in a little secret because this is where most businesses quietly fall apart. They don't fail because people won't work, they fail because no one actually owns outcomes. Let's talk about tasks, because this is the unsexy part that everyone skips. A task is not about handle onboarding. A task is about what happens, on what trigger, by which role, with what expected result. Guys, if those 4 things aren't clear, the task doesn't exist. And if tasks don't exist, systems can't exist with it. Here's something that I learned that will save you years within being a business owner. If a task doesn't have a clear owner, the owner is you. Whether you like it or not, that was a situation I was in while I was filming content. I owned everything behind doing it. This is why founders feel needed everywhere. Not because there's some type of special unicorn that is the best at everything, but because the structure defaults back to them. Now let's talk delegation, because most people delegate execution, but they keep the ownership. Now here's some examples. They say, do this, handle that, take care of this for me, but they still have to decide if it's done well, when it's done, and how it should improve. That is not delegation, guys. That is supervision. Real delegation happens when you assign an area, not a task. Ownership means they're responsible for the outcome, they improve the process over time, and of course, the problems don't come to you first. Now hear me out again. The problems don't come to you first. That part is crucial. If every issue still routes to you, ownership hasn't been transferred. I had to look at every single video before it got posted on our show card channel until I was able to transfer everything to that one employee and he had an AI clone of my own voice. And so then at that point, I wasn't in it anymore. Of course, it was incredibly uncomfortable at first because the system won't look exactly like how you do it. But of course, that's the price of leverage. There was a point where I realized I couldn't keep scaling and also being the decision maker for everything. It wasn't sustainable. So instead of asking people to help more, I changed the structure. I assigned ownership to specific areas, not with vague responsibility, but with clear expectations. Now here's some examples. I told them, this is yours. If it works better the next month than it does today, you're doing the job. At first, I had to fight the urge to jump back in like every other business owner. For instance, sales within my marketing company, Social Refresh, I could never give it up until I designated someone to do it. I always asked someone to fill in, but that was never a long-term scenario. I eventually changed and hired a full-time person where their full focus was on sales. Things weren't done exactly how I would have done them. Some decisions felt inefficient, but then something finally happened. I stopped getting pinged for small sales stuff. Improvements started happening without my involvement. And of course, problems were being solved before I even knew they existed. That's when it hit me. Control doesn't come from touching everything. It comes from building something that doesn't need you to survive. Now let's talk SOPs. An SOP is not a document, it's a transfer mechanism. Its only job is to prevent knowledge from living in one person's head. That's it. Sometimes that's a checklist, sometimes it's a Loom video, and sometimes it's a template or a script. If someone else can follow it and get the result, it's gonna work. One of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to finalize SOPs before anyone uses them. That is completely backwards. SOPs get better after they're in motion. You don't systemize to be perfect, you systemize to be consistent. And here's where everything compounds. You fix one painful system, you save time every week, you reinvest that time into the next system. That is leverage. If you consistently do this for 6 months, your business won't feel bigger, it'll actually feel lighter. And that's the real signal you built it right. If your business still needs you everywhere, it's not because you're indispensable, it's because the structure forces dependence. Systems aren't about complexity. They're about removing unnecessary decisions. Start small, fix what hurts, and of course, assign ownership. And at the end of it all, capture what works. That's how businesses stop running without founders and start running without them. Now here's a task for you. If you made it through the whole video, subscribe down below. Of course, leave a like so this gets pushed out to other people within the algorithm. But if you want to see very, very specific content, comment down below what exactly you're looking for, and I'll be able to go through them myself. See you guys in the next one.